Jane Reardon and Lori Keating, I've had the pleasure of working with them, and they do great presentations. I think they've both been introduced a couple of times. I'm going to refer you to their bios that are in the materials, but I do have a couple of personal things to say about them. Don't worry, they're pretty nice. Okay. But Jane and Lori have taken on not only running the programs respectively in Illinois and in Ohio, but helping those of us that start new programs across the country. They've donated unbelievable hours to both within this organization and personally. If you ever have any questions about some of the things that you've learned here, you can contact them. They're very, very helpful. And they just do great presentations. They included me as the diverse person, the old white guy, in one of their panels that we did out there. And we just had blast, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm going to sit down here because I need to listen to this. Now that I'm at the end of my career, I wish somebody would have told me about resiliency before, and nobody really has. But let's learn all about resiliency. Let's welcome Lori and Jane.
Thank you, John. That was so nice. Do I have to talk into this, or should I use that? This one. Okay, thank you. So I'm Jane, and Lori's going to follow up. We kind of divided this half and half this time. We like to go back and forth, but we know that this is being recorded. So it's my pleasure to be here. We do a lot in addition to mentoring at the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. And one of the things that I love to read about, write about, and educate about are the way the practice of law is changing, future law. And what does it mean to promote professionalism amidst the rapid changes engulfing the practice of law? And so Lori and I together are going to first address what are some of the major changes in the practice of law, and one of them is you need to use technology. And what is resiliency, and why is that important more than ever, considering how the law is evolving at a rapid pace? So before we go into the resiliency piece, I want to talk a little bit about how the practice of law is changing. Let's go back to 1819 when Cravath, Swaine, and Moore first set up the law firm in New York. I thought you were, John. I certainly was not there. But that model is probably familiar to almost all of us who've worked in law firms. It has persisted pretty much unchanged over time. Those of you who are in law firms will recognize these characteristics. You probably have most, if not all of them. We have partners, and they operate pretty autonomously, even though they're involved in every important decision, and they take home the profits and put it in their pockets at the end of the year. They attract and train their own legal talent. Now, Cravath developed this model because back in the 1800s and through the 1900s, until the ABA got involved, law school education was pretty spotty and inconsistent. So Cravath said, we will train them up. We will get the top legal talent, which has devolved to the top law schools that we can draw from across the country, and we will then train them internally. The key, and that we were just talking about this before the program began, is we leverage the employed lawyers to make money to the top, right? So I wrote pyramid. John and I think it's a pyramid scheme. That's probably why I put pyramid there. But it's actually a triangle, right? We've got a long isosceles triangle with a lot of low-level associates billing their brains out and making money up to the apex of the triangle where the equity partners are. And we have a competition, right? Everybody can't make it up there. In fact, very few do. So we're going to set it up, and we're going to sharpen our elbows and see who makes it to the top. How are we going to make our money? We're going to bill by the hour. And as much as we would like that to change, it is still the predominant model in law firms today. And here, relevant to mentoring will be the emphasis is on technical skills, particularly for the associates. We don't care how much time you spend. We want you to spend more time. Uncover those rocks analyze, show me your legal acumen, turn over every leaf, and let's charge for that. And that model has persisted. Now, as you probably know, unless you're living under a rock, it's under assault, and many people who study the profession say this is an unsustainable model and it is starting to crumble, right? Because the way the law firms have been able to maintain this is raising the rates and growing. But there's not enough demand to support that anymore, and the clients are starting to object, surprisingly. In fact, Bill Henderson, you might know him, he's a law professor at the University of Indiana, studies the profession. He says the competition, or rather the tournament and competition, isn't for career advancement anymore. It's more like the Hunger Games. It's survival day to day on the low part of the triangle. So why is this under assault, and why do we think it's not going to persist? There's quite a few fairly heavy drivers of change. I'm going to talk about 6 of them here. You might think of more. But as I already intimated, the clients are giving us pressure to deliver more for less money and more value, too. It's not only reduce how much you're charging me per hour, but what's your value add? There's a pressure for lawyers to get in and understand my pressures, how I do business at my company. And Chris Habel, I guess, isn't here, but a very brilliant approach to this is put our legal associates in a secondment right at our clients' firms so that they understand 1 day a week or once a month or even a week, whatever it is, they get intimately involved with how the client operates to better deliver legal services that meet their needs. So, in the second one, related to the first, in order to maintain costs and have predictability, corporate clients are pulling their work in-house. And that's been going on for a number of years. Digitization and technology is a huge driver of change. When I started practicing law, pre-internet, pre-computers, I know I'm dating myself, but I'll go out there and let you know, it was legal pens, not quills, but legal pads and pens. And I went to a civil litigation firm, about 80 lawyers, mid-size in Chicago, and the reason I was there is I wanted to try cases. They did get young associates in trying cases, and I did a lot of insurance defense work. It was like only a year or 2 in, and I thought, why am I doing research? These cases all run the same way. I can see right away, med-mal, the PI cases. Why is there not a bank of research and briefs? Why am I doing this over and over again? So I thought, well, I'm going to develop it myself. And I had these form books, and I started sharing it with my class of associates, thinking this was a great thing, and it was a great thing for our clients. Not so much for the partners and not so much for Jane, who was told, are you sure you're not cutting your time? This file can handle more. So I began to see we really have a conflict when we bill by the hour, and there is no incentive to be efficient and to serve our clients better. That didn't stick real well with me. Mercifully, that's not acceptable anymore. We now need to be able to search our databases and package our services and be much more efficient and effective with technology. It's easy to do. And as a matter of fact, the ABA a couple years ago, hopefully most of you know, said it is our ethical obligation to use technology. We can't say, like some of the partners did when I was young, computers, who needs them? It's just a big paperweight on my desk. No. So now comment 8 to the to Rule 1.1, which defines competence, says, in order to be competent as a lawyer, you need to keep abreast of technological changes, including the relative benefits and risks to our clients. Illinois adopted that this year. Many other states are adopting that model rule. It's really common sense. It's really a baseline requirement. Globalization is another huge driver of change. At the same time as our corporate clients are saying, reduce the costs and deliver value, they're spreading out across the country and across the world, right? And so now they're doing business in jurisdictions where we have to be aware of the regulations that are changing on a dime, And that's a lot of pressure. So that's a huge driver of change. The non-JDs in the legal space. You all know if you need to get a will, divorce, an LLC, you don't need to pay a lawyer to do it anymore. Go online, $199, $250. What's it going to cost? We have our legal Zooms, our Axioms, our Rocket Lawyers. All of those non-JD corporations are cannibalizing and constricting the market, mostly for our consumers. But it is going to, if it hasn't already, really radically affect the practice of law. In fact, Bill Henderson's research shows that lawyers peaked, the demand for lawyers peaked in 2004. Many of us think it was the financial crisis of 2008. 2004, the demand for lawyers has been dropping since then. However, legal services delivered by non-JDs and paralegals and others is going through the roof. It continues to go up. The graph is right in the opposite direction. That's a fascinating development that's only going to accelerate. And the last driver of change I want to alert you to is possible regulatory changes. My good buddy Jim Coyle here in Colorado is taking the lead, and Illinois is not far behind on proactive regulation. This could be a real game changer. As you probably know, we regulate lawyers by waiting for them to do something wrong. A client complains, and then we whack them. You know, it's a very reactive, disciplinary, whack-a-mole type process here in the United States. But in New South Wales, Australia, and possibly in the very near future in Colorado and Illinois, we are going to develop proactive regulation, help lawyers. Look, okay, you're setting up a shop. You really ought to go through this checklist for calendaring, deadlines, client trust account, and dear to my heart, not only the ethical rules, but the professionalism principles. Like, hey, have you thought of having mentoring as part of your firm culture and education? What about diversity and inclusion? What are your HR policies and procedures to make sure that you have a diverse and inclusive work environment? That is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. How many of you have heard of PMBR, this proactive? Okay, well, keep your ears out. That's great. It's spreading. Maybe they're all from Colorado. I don't know. The other thing I want to touch on is, as you probably know, in England and Canada and other countries, they're considering or already have really loosened the regulations on non-lawyer ownership of in law firms, sharing legal fees, alternative business structures. And the ABA has a commission on the future delivery of legal services looking at a lot of these issues. They've put out issues papers on legal service providers and alternative business solutions structures. Lori and I both sit on the ABA standing committee on professionalism, and we're kind of really fascinated. This stuff is going to really change the way we practice if it gets adopted. If any of it gets adopted in the near future. Yes?
One other thing too, and that's JDs in the living space. How many people in here use Uber? I mean, okay, the Uber model works for legal services as well. And there are a lot of places around the country where I need a lawyer on demand. I go on, I Google, and I find somebody who does me one document.
Yes.
So that's different from legal Zoom, but that's coming along.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that, the Uberization of legal services, yes, and unbundling and all that. Yes.
I was going to say, at least in our state, we've started the limited license legal.
I know, yep. I forgot, that's another thing. Washington is taking the lead on the limited license legal technician, which is a new professional. It is a licensed lawyer who may practice right now, as I understand it, only in the area of family law. Very specific. But Colorado's looking at it, Oregon's looking at it, other states may follow suit. And it's really the idea of, do you need to go to a JD to have blood drawn, or can you go to a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant? a way to provide legal services that is protecting the client because they're licensed, they're educated, they have CLE and ethical requirements, it kind of makes sense. And I've been on a lot of panels with the executive director of the Washington State Bar Association, Paula Littlewood. She does a marvelous job talking about that development.
Is anybody looking at recertification?
Recertification.
Like bar exams mini bar exams every 20 years?
I'm hearing no. No, not that I'm aware of. Okay, say that again.
In medicine, now medicine, things change, the substance of knowledge changes much faster. But if you're a certified physician in any field, you have to be recertified and go through a very, very rigorous exam every 10 years. And there are practice exams and things like that. But anyway, I'm not suggesting it. I'm just asking if anybody...
I'm not aware of it. Yeah, it's interesting. Yes, Nate.
This comment is a very important one, and that's this question. Who controls the profession? Is it this group right here, lawyers, or some other group outside of us? And that's what I think your question aims at. Are we regulated by the government, or are we self-regulating? If we're self-regulating, we're going to ask these kinds of questions.
And we should. We should, because, my personal opinion is we should remain self-regulated. And if we don't start asking those tough questions and start delivering to our clients in a more efficient way and more of them, the whole access to justice thing is beyond today. The others will step in, the government, the legislature. Michelle.
But is the certification question, is that basically stemming from the fact that if you're not practicing, then you need to recertify? Or if you haven't been admitted after you go through law school, then you need to recertify, or is it just recertification?
As I understand the medical profession, every X number of years, you need to prove your competency and get recertified. Am I right? Yeah. So it's not whether you're practicing or not. Jim.
Pilots do it as well, and it's being discussed, and more right now is being discussed is more mandatory programs in your CLE cycle, year 7 through 9 or 10 through 12, where you have to go through mandatory training to update and to prepare you for that area where you are going to have added levels of difficulty in your practice of law, things like that. And then when you over there mentioned the government regulation and whether we retain a self-governing profession or the government takes over, don't also forget spontaneous deregulation. And there's a great article in the Harvard Business Review of April this year that talks about platform businesses and how Uber, Airbnb, and other things, there's a complete deregulation of professions. And it's a great article. I'll present it to you if you'd like to pass it on.
I will. We'll pass it around. Okay. So what does this mean for law firms? I commend to your reading a Deloitte 2016, February of this year, study of law firms in the UK. But the conclusion there is that because of the reduced barriers to entry and the added nimbleness of small firms being able to respond to clients' requests at a lower and efficient price point, there will be more small firms. Large firms, at least for the short term, will continue to grow, squeezing out the mid-tier level. That's their conclusion. Now, what it means for mentoring and talent in the firms is really fascinating. So we have our triangle still, but Deloitte's analysis of the legal talent for the future law firm is that you will have a small apex of your leaders and partners still. They're responsible for the culture of the firm. But instead of having tiers of fee-generating lawyers, there's two blocks at the bottom. The block on the left is your traditional fee-generating lawyers who should be and will continue to be recruited and trained in the same manner. But on the right, this is a fascinating development. You're going to have your transients, your super temps, your lawyers but with a much broader skill set. Here's where your project managers, your data analysts, your salespeople will come from. And so they will both be promoted to the top of the firm. So what does this mean? This means a greater flexibility of the talent pool in law firms. So for those of us who are involved in mentoring, you need more flexibility. You need what, Lori? More resiliency. Because what is the skill set that we are going to need as lawyers in the future? Okay, so in the past, they call it the T-shaped. In the past, and still, law schools train up for the vertical access of the T, right? Technical skills, substantive knowledge. When I came out of law school, and for most of us, you could just kind of tweak around the edges and build on your substantive skill set. And you got along okay, especially if you're lucky enough to land a few clients, right? The world is so complex now that those who are studying what the skill set of the future lawyer needs is, are saying you need a broader-based understanding of cross-disciplinary things. Nate and I were talking about our college kids. They are so wide looking at the world in a cross-disciplinary way compared to baby boomers, for example. So we need to have skills, for example, in financial literacy and budgeting. You need to be able to know how much are your legal services and how does that affect your clients, and so that you can tell them. You need to understand their business. So some financial literacy is pretty much a required skill anymore. Technology, I've already touched on. It's key. Data, it was mind-boggling. I was doing some research a few years ago. Eric Schmidt, I believe, the CEO of Google, produced an article saying from the dawn of civilization through 2013, the amount of information produced by the human race was 5 exabits. Now, an exabit, I have to see, but I believe it is a certain number of gigabytes. Yes, it's 1 billion gigabytes, an exabit. So in 2010, this data is a little old, so it's only worse now. In 2010, it took us 2 days to produce 5 exabits of information. So if you're a litigator and you're asking for information, you've got to have some understanding of what form it takes, what is metadata, what are the native file formats you're asking for, and you can't ask for the moon and anymore. In fact, as you probably know, as of December of 2015, the federal rules have been changed so that you have to be proportional in your discovery, and some real requirements that you tailor your requests so that discovery doesn't take over. So anyway, that's just some examples of the types of skills. So you need a broad, you don't have to be an expert in the areas across the top of the T, but you have to have some understanding to be a successful lawyer going forward. It's not just enough to be a technical expert in the legal field, a substantive law that you've chosen. So I think that leads to Lori because it goes right into resiliency.
Thank you, Jane. All right, from Jane's remarks, I think you can see how the legal profession is rapidly changing and why we might need resilience in this process. It's a lot to take in. I think it's a fascinating thing to discuss, and it's good to challenge ourselves to think about what our profession is going to look like 5, 10, 15 years out. So, resilience. Resilience is the skill that you have when you're faced with adversity or challenge that allows you to rebound, adapt, and ideally thrive. A lot of people say resilience is bending without breaking, right? And that's really just the first part of this. That's the rebound part. But if you go beyond that, if you change your mindset, if you draw on your skills, you can go further, you can adapt. So when that same problem comes your way later, you might not hit the bottom and come back up. You've adapted, you've changed, you're better prepared for that challenge. If you can get to the end of the process, then when that problem comes again, you not only might not hit bottom, you've adapted, so you're prepared for it, and you no longer even see it as a problem. You see it as an opportunity for growth and success. So that's what we're aiming here for resilience. Let's see if this works right. Did you point at, oh, there we go. Okay, so where are we as lawyers? Where do we think we are on the resilience scale? Okay, fill in this blank. Now this is how many out of 10 lawyers rank in the 30th percentile? 30th percentile is not good, right? It's pretty lousy. You don't want to aim for the 30th percentile taking a test. I mean, you want to be 90th percentile or high. You already had a guess? Any other guesses out there? 8, 3, 5, well, 10. Who said 10? Who has no faith? All right, good to know. Well, our early sayers were right, actually. It is 9. You read something. He gets the water. Congrats. That is an alarming statistic, especially if you see from Jane all of these changes that are happening in the practice of law. We are not naturally equipped for resilience. And this isn't a made-up number. This comes from Larry Richard, Dr. Larry Richard, who was a former litigator, but also has his psychology degree, and he surveyed tens of thousands of attorneys. In fact, Lori Patton, at the very first panel we had, cited him in his great article called Herding Cats. So he's done the research to back this up. This just isn't his opinion. So that's where we're starting from. Moreover, if you look at other qualities lawyers have, they really undermine or undercut resilience. We like to be autonomous, which I'll talk about in a minute is not actually that helpful for resilience. We are antisocial. We are resistant to new ideas. Obviously, that's a problem, right? We are skeptical. We thrive on a high sense of urgency, and sometimes resilience requires looking at the longer term. And we're easily discouraged by setback. So these are not good things. This is not a good place to be starting from. And then because so many of our programs that we've talked about here at this conference involve law school students or new lawyers, I think it's helpful to look at millennials and the characteristics they bring to the table. And I'm talking in generalizations here. Nobody is defined by the characteristics of their generation. People are much more complex. But if you study generational theory, you will see that people say, hey, you are shaped in your formative years by the environment you grow up in, by the big political events and social events that are happening around you, by how your parents brought you up in society. Those things do fundamentally shape you, and that makes generations from a generation, characteristics of a Generation Xer different from a baby boomer and different from a millennial. So I think it's helpful to look at some of these characteristics and how they rate to resiliency. Here's some characteristics that undermine resiliency that millennials have. First one, what is that first slide there, left-hand corner? All right, everyone knows. Has everyone heard the term helicopter parenting? And again, not everyone, but to generalize, a lot of millennials were brought up by baby boomers, and especially in the case of people who are becoming lawyers, those baby boomers had resources, right? They're financially successful, they had a lot of political clout, and they did everything they could to help their children, who they loved dearly, along in life. Right? They were there to provide them comforts. They were there if something went wrong in school, maybe to speak up for their child and resolve the situation for them. So they were always there with hands-on encouragement and support. And that's great in a lot of ways, right? Those children felt loved, felt comforted, knew they were really important in their parents' life. But that process sometimes undermines resiliency because sometimes they were not given the opportunities to learn how to self-soothe. Right? To learn how to, okay, I had this big disappointment in school, now how do I deal with it? So I think it's important to think about that. Also, rules. Millennials really were brought up with a lot of rules, right? It was not the end of free play, but free play was in a lot of instances replaced by organized play with coaches and referees and lots of rules. And millennials felt safe within these boundaries. And they got to develop their skill set, became great soccer players, became great people in the band, whatever it was. And so it helped them. They saw the value of that, and they like rules. Again, rules sometimes don't help you in situations that call for resilience because those situations occur once the rules fall through and you're left with a problem or adversity you weren't expecting. Also, achievement was big with millennials. Again, boomers were like, we've got all of this resources, we're investing time in you, and we're gonna help you achieve. Achievement's really important. And they did achieve. I mean, if you look at my college application and my activities that I did before I got into school versus millennials, wow, they accomplished a lot before the age of 18. And that's great. But again, the problem with that is resilience is needed when your achievement is thwarted, right? When your plans, there's a bump in the road. So if you're used to achievement and feel confident, feel comforted by achievement, that can be a problem. And then finally on this slide, we have positive feedback. Everybody knows the old adage, everyone gets a trophy, right? So if you're in soccer, no matter whether you were in the team that won 0 games that season, if you take score, sometimes we don't take score, but you won 0 games in that season, or you won them all. Everybody at the end of the season is patted on the back. We all get a trophy. Everything's good, right? Everyone's equally important. And again, there's a lot of positives to that. Building self-esteem, making millennials feel valued. Parents really like that. But again, resilience comes in and lots of times when that positive feedback's not there. And if you are dependent on that positive feedback, you've got to find a new source of your strength. So, looking at that, what are some more characteristics of millennials? There's some other things on the page. That's not all that they are. We've got work-life. It's not even work-life balance anymore. It's work-life integration. How the workday is defined has changed. You may go home at 5, be with your family, be with your friends, serve your community, but you'll be back on the computer working remotely at 8 o'clock that night until as long as it takes to get the job done. It's a work-life integration instead of a separation. Also, millennials like to work in groups and a team. I'm a Generation Xer, so I'm independent. I'm a little bit cynical and philosophical. When I get a problem, I might ruminate about it with myself for days. But millennials, if they're faced with a problem, are more likely to say, hey, how can we solve this? How can we assemble a team? This need in our community, can we put together a nonprofit to address this? Can we ourselves come up with the resources here and make a difference? Also, it goes without saying, millennials are all about technology. They're digital natives. They had cell phones, the internet in their lives at a much, much earlier time than baby boomers certainly, and even Generation Xers. So they see that and integrate it in their life very differently. And technology is really, really important into resilience, I think, because it gives you a different way to look at your problems and gives you solutions that you might not otherwise have found. And then finally, millennials are full of optimism. And even though that's been challenged, I think, with the Great Recession we had when a lot of millennials were entering the workforce, they are still by nature optimistic. So these are things that are twofold. They help with resiliency, but they also help us as we approach future law. These are the things: work-life integration, teamwork, technology is huge. Optimism, we need going forward in our practice. And hopefully we're smart enough to do some reverse mentoring with our millennials and learn some of these things better for ourselves. So, just to sum up something, when you're thinking about a millennial starting their practice, here's what their upbringing and their past experiences bring to the table. They are optimistic. They have lots of hands-on support. They have high expectations. They work well as a team. They're used to constant encouragement. They have a clear plan to achieve, and they have work-life integration. So if you look at all these factors, then you look at your first year experience in law, how many things on that list are in your first year experience in practicing law? Not very many, right? the reality is harsh. And that, I think, is why we need mentoring programs. Because mentoring programs can come in and fill some of these holes for them. Mentors can be optimistic about them even if they're discouraged. Mentors can give hands-on support. Mentors can help them meet their high expectations by saying, hey, I know you didn't get hired at the job you thought you were going to have, but let's make a plan to achieve. Let's get you there in 5 years or 10 years. Mentors obviously can give constant encouragement. And the best mentors, although not all, I think, can talk about work-life integration. So that is why mentoring is so important. And I think it's really important to understand the millennial reality. And I personally think they have it tougher than baby boomers did, or Generation Xers, with the transition, just because of where they started from. And I have a slide similar to this at our mentor orientations, because I want the mentors, sometimes they're dismissive by the attitudes or the remarks they hear from millennials. But I want the mentors to understand where this is coming from so that they can have empathy and work from there. Okay, so that outlines where we are. The good news about resilience is it is a skill. It's not an innate trait that you're born with and you're stuck with whatever you got. We don't have to stay on that 30th percentile that we were measured at as lawyers. Nice sigh of relief, John. So how do we strengthen our resilience? And I use my remarks here based on Paula Davis-Lack, who is an attorney. So she has already looked at this issue and talked about how it applies to lawyers, so I find it very helpful. But if you're interested in the topic of resilience, I also refer you to Carol Dweck. She did a lot on growth mindset. She also was a main contributor to the ABA Grit Project, which is a fantastic project. If you haven't seen it, it's on their website. And it's actually a portable presentation you can use where you just get a panel of gritty lawyers who are in your legal community, and it defines what grit is, and it prompts those attorneys to talk about their experiences and how it's helped them on their career. There's also Angela Duckworth, who is big in this area. She did this famous TED Talk that got a lot of play, and she has a book on grit that came out in May, and it's on my way to my house, according to Amazon. So excited about that. So how do we strengthen our resilience? What are our steps? First and foremost is high quality connections. There is a misconception about resilience out there that resilience is something when you just dig into yourself really hard and power forward, power through, right? Well, studies show, in actuality, the most resilient people rely on high quality connections to get them through. So what do I mean by that? It's not something that's measured by Facebook. And you can see if you're a millennial, you might have 300, 500 or more friends on Facebook. Facebook's great. I'm not here at a future law presentation to say, hey, end your Facebook account. But I think it's important to realize that sometimes Facebook takes you out of the moment in your relationships with other people. And Facebook is a highlight reel. You know, it is people saying, hey, here's my great moment of the day. Or here's my not so great moment of the day. But in either way, they get to present it to the world the way they want to. It's not when you're seeing someone in real time and processing it. So just something to think about. So what do I mean by high quality connections? I mean people that you can go to at the end of the day and just hang out, be yourself, let it all hang out. And you know that after you talk to those people or share time with those people, you're going to feel better about yourself. You need those people in your life. You need people who will give you high fives and celebrate your successes. And you need people you can go to when you're feeling down or low or frustrated and talk honestly with them. And this slide, does anyone know what movie this is from? Inside Out, if you're a Disney fan, or if you're like me and have school-age kids, you're probably aware of sadness. And sadness's role in that movie, the whole idea of the movie is really you need sadness to get to joy. And I think that's an important topic to keep in mind when we're talking about resilience. Because sadness, and allowing yourself to experience sadness instead of denying it's not there, sadness allows you to reach out to those high quality connections in your life and they can comfort you, understand you, and get you to a place where you're at peace at yourself and your way on to joy again. So I think that's important to think about as well. So you got your high quality connections. It's also important for resilience to find meaning and purpose in what you do. Obviously, you can't do that every hour of every day. We're all asked to do things at our jobs we'd rather not. But if you look at your position, your job, and say, hey, this is what I'm getting out of it. This, and a way to approach it is look at your strengths. Manage your weaknesses, acknowledge them, be aware of them, but maybe take a strengths assessment finder online and say, hey, I'm really good at networking. I'm really good with creativity. And see if you can incorporate those things that you're naturally good at and give meaning to you more and more at what you do in your job every day. And millennials, we all know, find this is very important. And Jane Reardon gave a talk recently, TED Talk. Was that the Future of Law conference that you're...
No, it's about the importance of service. I'll just add one thing here. And I think it's more and more important because we are under pressure, as I intimated, to be more efficient in the way we deliver our legal services. But if we just focus on slicing and dicing our work into small tasks and processes, I think we become disconnected with why we became lawyers in the first place. And most of us entered this profession with high aspirations, with a real commitment to the principles that our country stands by. We wanted to make a difference, to give voice to the voiceless, to defend the defenseless. So digging deep and making sure that we have meaning and purpose in what we do is really essential, because we have to at the same time be more process-minded in how we deliver our services. So it's a balancing act.
That's a great point. Okay. You also need to be uniquely you. We're all different. You can't go around life being a cookie cutter of people around you or how you think you should be. So that's important as well. And they've actually done studies that people who live authentically, who work at their job and in their home lives, in accordance with their inner core values, are not only happier, we would think that, right? But they're actually better at what they do at work, which I think is pretty powerful. And how to come up with what you should be aspiring to? Well, Professor Larry Krieger, probably some people here have read his work. He does a lot on well-being and lawyers. He has a eulogy exercise he does with his law students. And he says, hey, at your eulogy, what kinds of things do you think the people there will be saying about you? What do you want them to say about you? And they say things like they had humility. They had integrity. They were willing to work with others and work hard. They don't say things like they had a great car and a great house, or they had a very lucrative practice. And so if you can live authentically and according to those values that are really important to you, then again, that is helping you along the path of resilience. And then this is a big one and it has a few different parts, but if you can cultivate flexible, some people call it optimistic, but flexible thinking, that can take you a long way. Because when you experience a problem or difficulty, how you process that to yourself makes a big difference in how you resolve things, right? So what do I mean by that? What are techniques you can use? First, you can reframe with the big picture in mind. So instead of getting caught up in the situation and saying, oh no, my life is over, think about, well, what will this problem look like tomorrow? Or maybe it's a bigger problem. What will it look like next week? Or next year, or at the end of my life, however far you need to go out, but reframe to make it look different to you. Then separate what you can control and focus on that only. The other stuff's just wasted energy, wasted time, wasted stress. Again, going back to Disney, Elsa's anthem resonates so well with young daughters everywhere, but also with their mothers. Let it go. It's liberating. Just focus on what you can control. Change your mindsets and challenge them. Maybe you are thinking something or assuming something about a situation that isn't necessarily true. So maybe, for instance, you've got something at work, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much more I need to do. I have to do it myself. It needs to be done perfectly. Instead of rethinking about the mindset, saying, maybe this is an opportunity for me to delegate, to help someone else along and take the burden off me. And if it's a less than perfect product, that's okay. Compartmentalize problems is another thing you can do. So if you can let work problems not spill into home problems and vice versa, I know that's challenging, but if you can do that, that's big. Also, if you have a problem with your boss, don't let that, catastrophize, make that bigger than it is by having problems with your coworkers as well. Try to limit the problem and the extent of the problem. That's a part of flexible thinking as well. And then, disavow perfectionism. I love this one because I struggle with it so much. I think it was our 2014 conference we had in Columbus, Ohio for NLMC that I first heard the adage, don't let perfect become the enemy of the good. I think it might have been you, John Montgomery, that said that. I don't know for sure, but. Oh, that's right, you weren't. Okay. Well, you've said it since. But someone said it in Columbus, and that was the first time I had heard it. And that's really important. And I think that's especially important in future law, because if you work on getting the perfect solution, the need's going to change by the time you have it all figured out. So you just have to roll with the punches a little bit more than we ever have had to do. So, and this is probably my favorite one of flexible thinking, staying curious. There is a fascinating society-wide conversation going along out there at all times. And do your part to stay informed about what it is. Read books. I always have books on my bedside, reading 3 or 4 at a time. Read web posts. Read. And why is that important? Well, there's people that think thoughtfully about what they see in society, and they're trying to make sense of it. And if you are part of that conversation, when you have something new come your way, you might be more adaptable in your thinking and maybe better prepared to recognize it and how you can use it as an opportunity for success rather than a setback. And then finally, last but not least, what we all know, but only some of us do, find positive release for your stress. Do what you need to do. Hit the gym, join a team, meditate, paint. That gets, whatever it is that helps you process your stress. Have that outline, have that outlet so that you can take time away from whatever is bothering you and come back to it feeling refreshed and recharged. That's a very important part of resilience as well. Okay, I'm getting I really need to cut off so that we have time for the small groups because we do want to do small group exercises. So I'm going to pass the baton to Jane.
Okay. And it's getting warm in this room.
It's very warm in this room.
Turn the lights down before you come back. So it's not cooler in here. Those rooms are like meat lockers back there.
All right.
So you're going to cool off. Don't worry.
Okay, so there's going to be 4 small groups now. And the idea is, how do we take these concepts of resiliency and an approach to future law and embed them into our mentoring program? What strategies can we use? So you should have a piece of paper that will give you these qualities and some questions. And what we're going to do, we're going to use rooms A, B, C, and E. Okay, we're skipping D. And John suggested that what we'll do is just count off. I'm going to direct you to count off 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you'll match to the 4 rooms. Exit through this way, pick up a snack, and go right into your small groups so that we can get you out of here on time. So the small groups will proceed for a half an hour. We'll come back in here for a full group debrief, and then you're done for the day. So thank you for staying on Saturday. Let's start right here. Thank you.